called HSA and the MSA. So if you're looking at your records and you see MOD HSA or Alt MSA, these are students that are, or the NYSA, these are students that are not taking the state assessments, they're taking a alternative assessment. In New York State, that's they call it a data portfolio. A student has several life skills type goals, and they put together a portfolio describing their progress towards reaching their individual goals. So these assessments are reserved for students with the most severe disabilities. In New York State, there's actually a cap. Only 2% of a school district can take this assessment. IEP. So the 504 falls under the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, and the IEP falls under the IDEA. 504 is more of an umbrella, and it's based on medical considerations, and it's disability in any kind of life function, and I think eating, sleeping, standing, walking, breathing, thinking, contemplating, etc. is actually in the criteria for receiving a 504 plan. So you can see anything from a bee sting allergy to a child that has a broken arm to something like a learning disability that doesn't necessarily fit the criteria for the eligibility classification. So when you see a 504, it does not automatically imply that the child is having learning needs. So it's important to look closer at that. And 504 plans can be temporary. So they can be for, like, if a child breaks their arm and needs an accommodation, a scribe or someone to write for them, a 504 plan can be initiated. And often we use 504 plans to formalize instructional plans because we're allowed to give testing and accommodations on any of our local exams. So a lot of times, especially in our district or high poverty districts, there's a lot of transiency, which we'll talk about a little later. So we have students that are moving in and out of the district. So oftentimes, we don't like to look at it as a consolation prize, but if a child is ineligible and does not fit any of the criteria for the 13 disability classifications, oftentimes we will create a 504 plan to formalize the plan so that if the child were to go to another school district, they wouldn't have to wait the months of time for the school district to collect data and determine a plan for them. So oftentimes what we will see is that children have a classification of OHI, other health impaired, because anytime there's a comorbid disability, so for example, if we know the child has ADHD or the child also has a learning disability, we go with that one instead of ED. So Liz had asked me, she said that a lot of her records she sees the children are OHI, and I thought it was really fascinating that the records that she gave me to look at, the child was classified as OHI, had the lead exposure, but if you look through all of the documentation of the child, everything that they talk about is all behavioral, and the record of her behavior assessment scales showed high depression, anxiety, self-esteem, self-reliance, and the only goal she had on her IEP was a behavioral goal. So.
But she had lead poisoning.
But she didn't have lead
poisoning. And it was listed as one of the factors. And that's the important thing for us is lots of times when we get these school records and they have all this stuff in them because the New York records have all this stuff in them, you have to focus on your brain and that's in there because you've started a lawsuit with a child who definitely had high elevated lead levels, and you have all these other factors which we always talk about, we all know about it. It's not like I'm telling a tale out of school, but there's right there, first line, when they list the history of the child, history of elevated lead levels. Somebody thinks it's important, and we certainly do.
In Maryland, when we request for school records, we literally get 1 or 2 pages. Case in point, I had a case on Tuesday where we had requested school records of a child that went through high school, and what did I get? I got 1 record. It was a high school transcript, and that was it. So in Maryland, it's my understanding it's far different than New York, where they receive, believe it or not, thousands of records for children. And so there's really, it takes a lot of pulling teeth to get school records in Maryland, and I'll go a little bit more of that in the retention period. Teacher comments. Okay, so these can help us and hurt us, and I think that goes for both sides. In this particular case, the teacher says over and over, and this is just one page of teacher comments, lateness is a problem, attendance is a problem. This child can do so much more, has so much more potential, but they're not here. The teacher is picking up on the fact that the child has the capabilities, but they're not there. So that's something to really focus on. You also see teacher comments where it's a good student and they had great behavior. Well, a lot of times in these cases, the argument is the behavior is poor, the behavior is bad, the child has ODD. But here's the teacher's subjective comments, who's with the child perhaps every day or every other day, saying that the child does in fact have good behavior and that maybe the child reads well or just things that are entirely inconsistent with the genre of the case that you're dealing with. This particular plaintiff had I believe it's three different elementary schools in a span of kindergarten through 5th grade. Think about what that means to the kid, especially in an elementary school and even for middle school and high school. That means that the child has to reacclimate. They have to get used to new teachers. They have to get used to new peers. Oftentimes in Maryland or in Baltimore City, you're dealing with students going from east side to west side. That's huge in and of itself because of the various cultures, east side and west side. You're talking about readapting to new schools. You're talking about moving houses, perhaps, maybe moving from one family to another family, families having financial difficulties. So with every move, with every transfer, the child is inevitably going to miss something in translation. The child is going to miss time from school. Maybe it's indicative of a chaotic house life or home life. These are all particular things that you just don't look at how many schools, you look at what does that mean to the plaintiff and to the family. So this is the parent health assessment. This is usually an interesting record that, again, is not available in all cases, but we were fortunate to have it in this case. Yes, it does show that there's a history of lead poisoning, but it also shows, and in this case, we picked up on right away, that there's a history of seizures in this child. And that, in and of itself, was very important in determining, first of all, the value of the case, and what experts that we would need in defending the case. So you see their medical history. You also see at the very top of the record an address. So I'm sure we all know when you're looking through these records, don't just look at absences, withdrawals, transfers, grades, but look for addresses. Are these supplemental addresses? Yes, that type of information is usually beyond the time frame that the plaintiff is talking about with respect to your property, but maybe they're using a house that as a fixed address that their grandparent lived in, and so you can look at that house when you're in depositions. You would ask the caregiver, not necessarily the child, but did you ever visit this house or live at this house when the child was born up until the age of 6?
Mom's third cousin, 15 times removed, had a seizure when she was 4. Let's get that out of the records. It doesn't belong in this child's record. So that's one of the things that we can look for down the road for when we're always thinking, I may go to trial, I may go to trial, what do I need to do here? We get neuropsych psychological evaluations in there. Those records are good for plaintiffs sometimes, good for defense sometimes. Read through them, look in the social history section, look throughout that entire record, see what conclusion they come to at the end. And it's not just one part, there's multiple parts to that. Look at them all and see what kind of testing the child underwent. And then what the results of that. Is it an IEP? Is it a 504? What did the child get? Or maybe no classification, did not meet a classification. Speech and language therapy records are in there. How much time they're getting with their speech and language therapy. Are they getting occupational therapy? It's all in the New York records. You pretty much will find it all in there. And then you look for the whys and you look for the outside records for the early childhood before they were into the actual school setting of kindergarten and see when these services started, mostly for speech and language or occupational therapy, and they're getting it from either WIC or they're getting it from that birth to 3 time period where their parents are entitled to the extra assistance, the Head Start. Lots of the kids in Rochester go to Head Start. Why and what makes them able to go? Find out, is it because of a lead diagnosis? The evaluation to see if the child qualifies for an IEP, you want to show those to make sure your experts got those, because you're going to have some prior IQ testing in there, and you want to make sure that your expert sees that prior IQ testing, knows what this child has already undergone, and what has already been decided regarding that child. Will you see in New York records anxiety, depression, schizophrenia, bipolar later on in their years, because you're not going to get that as an early diagnosis? Yes, you're going to see that, and your expert has to be made aware of that when you see it, and don't let him be figuring it out when he's sitting on the stand there and the defense counsel brings it up. So he needs that in order to prepare. So he needs a full set of school records prior to evaluating the child and prior to making his own report.